So hi, my name is Kieran. I'm a Drupal developer here at the Reading Room, and I'm here to talk to you about the key things that I've learned building government websites with Drupal. I think building a website for the public sector is more than just building a regular web project. There are many more things for you to consider, particularly regarding security, compliance, accessibility, and transparency in many cases. And these are all things that need to be considered ahead of the development. They're not things that you can just bolt on at the end. So there's a bit of extra planning that needs to happen to make sure that you're compliant with the local laws in which you are hosting the site. So in the case of the UK government, that would be GDPR and so forth, and ensure that you're complying with the legal and ethical requirements that you need to for the particular jurisdiction that you're in. Now, Drupal is an extremely powerful tool for doing this. In fact, according to a survey by Drupal.org done in 2021, 58% of the world's government websites in over 150 different countries are built on Drupal. And part of the reason for that is due to the immense reliability, security, and flexibility of Drupal as an ecosystem that make it perfect for building government websites from a local government to a national government level. And so I'd like to share with you a few of the key things that I've learned working on UK government sites to help maybe give you some insight as to why Drupal is a powerful tool for that. And if you find yourself building UK government sites or any government sites, perhaps some key takeaways that I've learned that then you won't have to learn the hard way. One of the things I've learned building government websites with Drupal is the importance of security. Now, you're not just protecting a brand when you're working on a government website. You are protecting sensitive system data and essentially public trust. So security is particularly important. And in the event of a breach, it can often have more serious consequences than perhaps with sites in the private sector, albeit both are serious. There's an extra layer of responsibility that you have building government websites. Security is not something that you can just bolt on at the end. It's something that you really need to consider as part of the planning process. And what makes Drupal a really good tool for that is that it in itself is a robust framework from a security perspective with a global security team that is constantly scanning for vulnerabilities within the Drupal code base and a series of contributed modules themselves, which all have to adhere to a security advisory policy. So given the extent of the Drupal ecosystem's focus on security, you can fairly reliably, provided you take a couple of steps, which I'll go over in a minute, you are going to be protecting your data that you're hosting on your site and the customers and users that you have of your Drupal product. The main things that you need to do are firstly to ensure that hosting that this is something that Drupal is reliant on Drupal. So you need to make sure that you have a reliable and secure hosting system. But most important, something that's compliant with things like GDPR, AWS or Azure are great options. Azure is probably your best option. It's really quite robust. And importantly, it's having an aggressive update schedule. So it's making sure that you are scanning your site for any new Drupal core updates. You're scanning your site for any new contributed modules that you're using, and making sure that at the very least, a monthly basis, you're making sure that everything is staying up to date so that when security advisories, that is vulnerabilities, are identified, they can be patched quickly. And so the window for them being taken advantage of is much, much smaller. So having an aggressive update schedule is really, really important for maintaining the security of your Drupal site. Secondly, it's having clearly defined user roles. So having a structured user workflow. So you would give users of the website, the administrators of the website, only the permissions that they would need to perform the function that they're using the website for. So if you've got somebody who is populating the website with content, creating pages and so forth, there wouldn't be any reason for that user to have any access to any of the usernames and passwords or anything like that. That should be restricted to the smallest number of people possible, because this then minimizes the risk of this data becoming exposed by really kind of restricting access even to people who, otherwise work for the government and would be authorized to have that. Finally, just to say that security is a really important consideration when you're building government websites. And one thing that I've learned is this is not something that you can bolt on at the end. It has to be an important part of your planning, your development, and ultimately your ship to production. Another thing that I've learned building government websites using Drupal is the importance of accessibility, and also the lesson that accessibility is not something that you can bolt on at the end. It's something that needs to be a core part of the designs that you develop for any government website, and also the development process as well. In most cases, you are going to be required to adhere to WCAG 2.1 AA accessibility requirements, which WCAG is a scale of how accessible a site is. It takes into account things like color contrast and readability, how easy it is for people who are using screen readers or non-traditional ways of navigating the site other than a mouse and keyboard. So given the size of the user base, and particularly the diversity of the user base that you have when you're building government websites, it's really important. You have a legal and ethical requirement to ensure that your site is accessible to everybody who would require to use it. Not just your most common traditional user. Now, as I said, this is not something that you can just bolt on at the end. If you do, you'll find yourself tearing down everything you've built and essentially building everything up from the bottom, which is going to come at an enormous cost. So the lesson there is to learn this is something that really has to be part of the bread and butter of your Drupal website. And the designs should be created with these accessibility requirements already baked in, and developers, particularly the front-end developers who are working on aware of what the site needs to look like in order to be accessible to all of the users who need to use it. So this extends beyond, though, just the people who are building and designing the website. The people who are using the website, so that might be people at the government in which you're building the site, also need to be aware that they also have a responsibility to make sure content that they create on top of the website that is being built is accessible in itself. So that's things like making sure that you add alt text to images so that somebody who can't see the image gets read a description of that image, and also ARIA labels on your elements as well. Assist, as I said earlier, with those who are not necessarily using a mouse and keyboard to navigate through your site. There are a lot of things to consider when making sure that your site is accessible, but the key takeaway is that it can't be something that you add on at the end. It needs to be part of the process. And Drupal has some really good base themes on which you can build, but it's really down to the designers and the development team, and also the website users, make sure that they're thinking of the less able website populating the Drupal site. Another thing that you can do to maintain accessibility is make sure that you're running automated tests as part of your deployment pipelines. This means that you can actually scan the code for violations of the WCAG guidelines, and to ensure that any additional code that you are adding as part of the continuous development of your Drupal product doesn't then regress to a point where the site is no longer accessible. So making sure that you have because that you always get human error, but if you can rely on an automated script that is going to flag whether or not you've inserted any part of a feature that wouldn't be fully accessible, then you can make sure that you don't fall into a trap of no longer being accessible, which of course is a legal requirement and very, very important to make sure that you do if you're building a government website for a diverse base of potential website users. Another key thing that I've learned building government websites with Drupal is to plan for the peak traffic that you're going to get on that site. An example of a local council website which may not get an enormous amount of traffic on a day-to-day basis. But if something were to happen, like there was a local flood or a fire or some other event that's going to drive users to that site, having server infrastructure and a Drupal code base that is designed to handle only the normal amount of traffic is going to result in the website not performing properly, possibly being inaccessible completely. And this is absolutely not something that you can have if you are a government agency that's providing information to users in a potential crisis or a situation where accessing that information from having public access to that information is essential and really quite critical. So you in another example, maybe for example a local election result as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be critical to life, but making sure that ultimately much of the purpose of a government website is to provide public access to that information. And if public access to information is compromised in any way, then the purpose of that Drupal website is ultimately not being met. So making sure that you plan for peak website traffic, so the most it's ever going to be, and making sure that your site is going to remain fit for purpose during those time periods. Now, that's more than just having a really, really good server. Ultimately, that is one solution, but it's a bit of I would say it's a very large hammer for what's potentially a quite fragile nail, perhaps. It's a bit of a nuclear option. And so it's much better to, yes, make sure that your servers are adequate, but using only a very, very large server ultimately uses more power, more electricity to have all of these high-powered components ready, standing there, not necessarily being used at all times, and consuming a lot of power. Because when you're building for government entities, often they are audited for their own energy consumption and have to publish figures on things like CO2 used and things like that. And so if you have this massive server coupled with potentially not very good code, sometimes the reason that you need that very, very large server is not just because of the traffic, but also due to the inefficiency of the code. So it's a key responsibility of anybody building Drupal websites, and something that I've certainly learned is making sure that code is extremely performant. That is, it doesn't do anything that it doesn't need to do for the task that it's being asked to perform, and really thinking about efficiency when you're writing that code. Drupal itself is a great framework to be using for high traffic websites. Again, another reason why it's being used on more than half of the world's government websites is that it's got a really great caching strategy. This means that pages can be temporarily stored, and they don't necessarily need to be loaded every time they're visited, which saves a lot of server processing. They have a big pipe, for example, is something in the Drupal caching strategy that can be really great to use. And there are other Drupal caches, such as dynamic page cache as well, which can be really great at serving content that has been stored temporarily in a cache to avoid your server having to do more than it needs to do during high traffic events. And if you can couple your Drupal site with something like a content delivery network, like a CDN, perhaps Cloudflare is a go-to here at Reading Room. It can really help make sure that the server doesn't need to load every single request that is being made upon a server, because in the case of government websites, sometimes that can be thousands, tens of thousands, or in particular situations, possibly even more. So making sure that you really, because again, if you've got too much traffic coming to this site, the site can then fail to load its pages, and then the purpose of providing critical information to the public, which is often a goal or a purpose of a government website, is ultimately not met, and that can have potentially serious consequences if people are in a situation where they need that information and they don't know otherwise what to do. So it's a key responsibility, and I think something that I've learned building Drupal websites is to not underestimate the importance of making sure that you keep your code performant, your caching strategies intelligent, and that you're using the right layers on your server infrastructure, like a CDN. So I think, making sure that that you plan for extreme traffic spikes when building government websites is really, really important, and a key lesson that I've certainly learned when building those websites. So another key consideration and another key lesson that I've learned when building government websites with Drupal is to make sure that you have a clear and coherent content strategy. So that is a content structure that helps maintain the tidiness, the structure of your Drupal website. It's often with, or almost always with government websites, it's much more complicated than just a simple blog where you've got one author and a number of different blog pages under one category. You've usually got a team of various different users who are responsible for different parts of the website, and the website itself has different parts. You might have a government website with a sort of an energy department. You might have one with a local council department. You might have one with the parks department, finance, sanitation, all sorts. It can really become quite a sprawling mess if you don't have a sensible way to structure your content in a way that's going to make sense to users who come to the site. There's nothing more frustrating than getting on a website and not being able to find what you're looking for. So Drupal is a really, really great tool for solving those kinds of problems. One of the lessons that I've learned is to make sure that you're using the right different content types. So you might have a content type for events. You might have another content type for a service, another one for a public notice, one that might be a news update of some kind. And doing this allows the Drupal ecosystem, the Drupal framework, to categorize these different types of content, making it easier to find. You can use Drupal views to list various different contents of different types, or provide a search functionality that allows you to then filter. You can search for keywords that are in that content, and because if everything is of one type, it can become a little bit of a needle in a haystack situation. So making sure that you're sensible about your site structure, and also that extends to when it comes to navigation menus as well. Drupal again is great for this. It's got a really, really robust way of handling the website's navigation. So it can then be relatively easy to categorize this content in a way that makes sense and that users can then find their content. An important lesson I think that I've learned building government websites is to not neglect or forget the power of Drupal's taxonomy system. So this is essentially keywords that you can use, that you can tag onto content, that then makes it easier to group together in ways that the user can find it, or you can allow users to search or filter by certain categories as well, in addition to the categories of the content type itself. So it's a really powerful additional layer that you can add onto your content structure for your Drupal site, that then makes finding content and maintaining a clean and sensible content structure when you have, multiple, possibly as many as hundreds of different users adding content of various different types, to keep your site structured, clean, and easy for the website users to understand and find content. Again, integrating the user roles into this system is great. You're able to have some users who are only able to draft content and other users who are responsible for coming and approving content. You can use the Drupal user roles to add granular permissions to be able to manage content in a way that allows all of the content to be properly audited before it's displayed to the public, and to ultimately ensure that the integrity of the content on the website is maintained in a sensible way. Because of the importance of the information that you have on this site, you want to make sure that any mistakes or errors are either prevented or corrected quickly. So using Drupal's inbuilt content types, taxonomies, views, and other features to make sure that the site structure is maintained is really, really important, and definitely a lesson that I can take away from my experience building government websites with Drupal. Another thing that I've learned when building government websites with Drupal is simply not to reinvent the wheel. Drupal itself is one of the reasons that I really like using Drupal, is the really powerful, experienced, competent community that Drupal has around it. There are thousands of developers all over the world who are not only maintaining the security and building features upon Drupal core, but there are also many different contributed modules out there that can often solve the problem, or somebody has had the problem that you're facing yourself, and you can leverage their solution either verbatim or you can tweak it for your own requirements. Drupal itself has a Gov UK front-end theme that is compliant with Gov UK's theme guidelines. So it's got all of the right styling that harkens back to what I said earlier about accessibility guidelines and WCAG, and making sure that the site is going to be usable in the way that the UK government and Gov UK have dictated that it should be. And additionally, there's a local gov distribution. So for local councils, there's a framework of components and various other website features that could be leveraged for local sites that then provide consistency between different council websites, so that a user who is used to visiting one council website may move to a different council and then not have to relearn everything about how to use the council website. There's a sense of consistency that then can increase the usability and the ease of access to information that is often queried. And things you want to know when your bins go out, for example, you then don't start to have to learn a new way of using a website to get that information. So the local gov distribution is really powerful. The Gov UK front-end framework and theme is really powerful in the sense that it makes it easy and fast, or easier and faster, to comply with the various different legal and ethical requirements that you have when building government websites with Drupal. Obviously, some of that onus needs to be on the developers as designers, and the theme itself is very flexible, so it's certainly possible to make changes. So not every site is going to look exactly the same, but the key parts of making sure that the website is government ready are already part of the Drupal ecosystem and the community as a whole. So one of the lessons that I've learned when building government websites with Drupal is to lean on the community for solutions that may already exist for the problem that you're trying to solve. And they're often, they always are well considered, secure, resilient to security vulnerabilities, and can really help speed up the process and also increase the standard of the government website that you're building. Again, another reason why Drupal is so popular amongst government agencies. So another important thing that I've learned from building government websites with Drupal is not to underestimate the really powerful, really extensive Drupal community and all of the features that it has created that are out there that can be leveraged to make your site more secure, more usable, and easier to access for the public which it's trying to serve. So here at Reading, we've been building government websites for a variety of clients for several years now. And the key takeaways have been really valuable for us to learn from our experience building these sites. The things that we've learned are now well documented for us. And we hold regular sessions to ensure that we're distributing that knowledge amongst the team. Even those developers who haven't worked on those government projects directly still take away those important learnings, which frankly are really helpful on any side, government or not, that really help us here at Reading Room increase the standard of the kind of sites that we produce, government or not. Building government websites is its own unique challenge that comes with its own responsibilities. And it's been really, really valuable to learn from that experience. And it allows us to increase the standards of the standards, the security, the accessibility, the resilience of the products that we build, and only goes on to cement my love for Drupal and why I think that it's a really, really powerful tool for building government websites, or for building non-government websites like e-commerce platforms or anything else really that you'd like to build. One of Drupal's key strengths is not only its security, not only its user community and its developer community, but also its flexibility. One thing that you'll never stop hearing from me is that whatever it is that you want to do with Drupal can do it. And that's, for me, has been a real pleasure to build government websites with Drupal.